ادع إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. My dear brothers and sisters in Islam, subhanallah, when it comes to understanding of the Sharia, sometimes it can be hard, sometimes it can be easy. Depend on the person who really want to learn and how much he commit himself to it and so on. But what we need to understand, and that's very important, there are an obligation upon every Muslim, okay, to do. And when the act of worship is an obligation upon the Muslims, becomes compulsory upon that person to learn that thing. As an example, it's an obligation upon us, okay, to pray. It's an obligation upon us to pray. So it becomes an obligation upon us to learn how to pray properly. Okay, in order to pray, you need to know how to make wudu. So it becomes an obligation upon us to learn how to make wudu, because you cannot pray without making wudu. So in another word, anything, it's obligated to us, and it's an obligation upon us. It's compulsory to do. Then the learning and the knowledge of that act of worship becomes an obligation and becomes compulsory. As an example for something, it's not obligation upon some and it is upon others, okay? For example, just say you are poor and you don't have money whatsoever, yeah? You don't have money, you're poor. So you do not need to learn where to pay zakat and how to pay zakat. All what you need to know is a nisab, because just in case if you reach that value, okay? Like if you have the amount. So you only need to know the amount, nothing else. But you don't need to know the percentage, who to pay, whatever. Why? Because it's not obligated upon you to pay zakat. Just say, okay, like you were poor, then you worked and you saved money, and now you have above the nisab. Now becomes an obligation upon you now to learn how to pay zakat, where to pay zakat, when to pay zakat, okay? That becomes an obligation. Just say for someone is not going to Hajj, is not thinking of going to Hajj, it's not obligation upon you, okay, to learn how to perform Hajj, what you need to do when you go there. You don't need to know about the miqat, about the ihram, about the tawaf. You don't need to know. Why? Because you're not doing it. It's not obligated to you. It's not an obligation upon you. But just say you decided to go to Hajj, and now, okay, you are ready to go to Hajj. Now becomes an obligation upon you, all right, to learn how to perform Hajj. You got the picture? So, in order to do anything that Allah wants from us, you need to learn it and you need to implement it, okay? And anything is not obligated to you, you don't need to learn it. All right. So that's why you don't need to be a scholar. It's not an obligation upon you to be a scholar. But it is an obligation upon you, if you learn something, is to implement it and to teach it, okay? And to be patient with it. In another word, just say like I learned how to pray. I came home and I saw my family, my kid, they don't know how to pray. It's an obligation upon me to teach them how to pray, okay? It's an obligation upon me to teach them how to pray. So that's what we need to do as Muslims. Anything that you have to do, you have to learn. Anything becomes an obligation upon you, then it becomes an obligation upon you to learn it. Okay, so this knowledge becomes compulsory. Anything is not obligated to you, okay, it's not an obligation upon you, then you don't need to learn it. If you want to learn it, fair enough, but it's not an obligation. Okay, we have to be very careful. So therefore the ulama, they say, for every Muslim, they should know and learn 4 things. What these 4 things? They said, like you have to have the knowledge. You have to have the knowledge. Remember, we're talking if something obligated to you, you have to learn it, okay? So you have to have the knowledge. Once you have the knowledge, you have to implement that knowledge. You have to implement it. You learned it, you implement it. In another word, just say like, now you're praying, okay? You didn't know some part of the prayer properly. You learned it. You have to implement. Don't say, oh, I got used to it that way. I want to pray this way. No, Habibi, you pray according to what you learned, okay? And then you need to teach that knowledge and then you need to be patient by teaching and implementing that knowledge. Okay, I came to my mind as an example. Someone may say, what you may learn and not do. As an example, like most of the people who go to Friday prayer, okay, when we go to Friday prayer, we know in the mosque now they have two adhan. Most of the mosques they have two adhan. So what they do when the first adhan is called, people they get up and they pray. And if you ask them what you're praying, they say sunnah. They're praying sunnah. So when you say sunnah, that means the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam did it. And if you're following the way of the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam. Okay? Now, when you learn in the time of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, that was only one adhan, and the second adhan, okay, came with Uthman radiallahu an. Yani Uthman radiallahu an, he's the one who ordered the second or the first adhan, then the second adhan. Okay, so the first adhan called at the mosque is not the adhan that followed by sunnah. Okay, it's not followed by sunnah. But can you pray 2 rak'at or more, okay, after this adhan, before the khatib goes on the minbar? Yes, you can, but it's not sunnah, it's nafila. Nafila, that it's as long as it's not forbidden time, you can pray as much as you want as nafila. But when you say sunnah, that means you're saying in Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did it that way, so you're doing it that way. Just say before you went to the mosque, you didn't know the first adhan, like called, everyone stood up, prayed to the God, you got up to pray, you didn't know what to pray, you ask someone that said, oh, sunnah, and you're praying sunnah. Now you went, okay, and you start learning the knowledge, and you found out there is no such sunnah prayer after the first adhan, but there is nafila prayer, different intention. Okay, you learned it. You can't go back and say, oh, it doesn't matter, I'll still pray the sunnah, look, everyone does it, and I got used to it. No, before you didn't know, now you know. It happened in the time of the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, where one Sahabi, he was traveling, coming to Medina, and he was eating date, and it was Ramadan then, and he didn't know. So he came nearly to midday, and when he was eating the date, he was told that was fasting was Ramadan, and he had one piece in his hand, like he ate a bucket. He still had one piece in his hand. So what happened? He tried to eat it after he found out. Okay, so this is wrong. Why? Because before you knew, it's okay, but as soon as you find out, you're not allowed. And in other words, just say you had a cup water in your hand in the day of Ramadan, and you forgot, and you're drinking. Okay, you're drinking, even you drank most of it. Then you remember it's Ramadan. You can't say, oh, because I drank most of it, I'll finish it off. Now you stop straight away. What you drank before the knowledge was acceptable. After that knowledge is not acceptable. Okay, so that's why it's very important, inshallah. When you learn, you implement that knowledge. Make sure you learn the act of worship that you're doing. And make sure you learn it from people knowledgeable, from people they know what they're doing. Okay, I'll give you a small example. You may go to a person who's praying. Okay, praying, he prayed all his life. You go up to him and you say, brother, salaam alaikum, wa alaikum salam, can you teach me how to pray? Easy. Stand up, you do takbir, you Surah al-Fatiha, you do ruku', whatever. No more. That's how I pray, that's how I teach you. What happens if you go to this same person and you tell him, brother, I know you're praying, but I want you to teach me the prayer of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Would he be able to teach you straight away? No. Why? Even though he's praying, but he's praying by learning, by copying. He's not praying by learning, by knowledge. Okay? So he's praying by copying people. He saw people how they prayed, so he's praying. So he can teach you how he prays. But as soon as you say, teach me the Prophet prayer, even though he believed, yeah, the Prophet prayed and he must have done the same thing, takbir, fatiha, ruku', sujood. Okay, but for me to tell you this is how the Prophet prayed, I would not be able unless if I learned the prayer by knowledge, by scholars who teach how the Prophet ﷺ prayed. Did you get what I mean? So in another word, practicing by copying, which we call it taqlid, to start with it's okay. But becomes an obligation then to learn it properly, to learn, is that the correct way to do it? Is that a correct way, like Nabi ﷺ did? Is this how Nabi ﷺ taught the Sahaba to pray? You need to learn it, okay? You have to seek that knowledge. And once, inshallah, you go out to learn that knowledge, man, you becomes knowledgeable in that part of act of worship. Yani, in other words, you know what to do if you make mistakes. You know what to do if somebody comes to you and he said, oh, I did this mistake, what should I do? Because you learned it, you know what to do. Okay? If you didn't know the knowledge, you're only practicing with no knowledge, even if you make mistake yourself, you wouldn't know what to do. You wouldn't be able to correct it because you don't know. You don't have the knowledge. So that's why we encourage everyone, inshallah, to learn. Okay, to learn what is obligated to you in order to perform it properly and to do it in the best manner, in the best way. And that way, bi-iznillah, khushu' will enter your heart. Why? Because you realize now, every action you're doing, you're following in Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam. You have the knowledge, why I'm doing this. This is how Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam did it. So when that knowledge enters your heart, what would happen to your prayer or any act of worship? You will concentrate more bi-iznillah, and you will be content more. And that will help you, inshallah, to bring khushu' into your heart. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you more for this act of worship because you did it properly according to the teaching of Allah and His Messenger. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصل اللهم على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.
قل إن صلاتي ونسكي ومحياي ومماتي لله رب العالمين